Hi. Thank you, Leeza. It's amazing to be here with all of you and at Alserkal. So thank you to ACAW and Alserkal Avenue for bringing this group of people together. I guess this is meant to be a sort of open discussion. We'll talk for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and then open it up to the floor.
Yeah, we have probably now about 25 minutes between us, and then we can open it to the floor and we can move fluidly.
So I guess what Uns and I will do is ask you guys a couple of questions, and then hopefully it'll create a lively dialogue between this group. I guess what I was very struck by through the three presentations with Ranbir, Herman, and Nikhil was how much memory and observation are still central to the practice of art making, you know, and it was actually quite wonderful to kind of go back to those basics of careful observation, careful reading, but also careful remembering. And I guess perhaps we start with Ranbir to think about how, of course, you have these kind of slow, long durational memories that come from childhood, but we now live in this completely sort of, you know, speeded up world. And I guess there must be a tension, and there must be quite a lot of discipline that you have to kind of retreat from that, to be able to deep dive into that past. And maybe you could talk a bit more about the process.
Yes, the events which I spoke of, now there are very many, I just spoke of one in the introduction to the slides, but of course I spoke then more once I was showing touched upon other events while I was talking about, showing the video clips. I think I do not find attention in what I experienced as a child. I think that's building up of a sensibility. That's fine-tuning of a sensibility. And also, as I said in the introduction, it was a very isolated and very sheltered childhood. But it was not boring. There was no loneliness. When I was all by myself, I do have a brother, an older brother, but all of us were, one place or the other in this largish house, and so it allowed space for contemplation and I think fine-tuning. Any small little incident, observing even something like which all of us have, I believe, done, following an ant. Where does the ant go? And then following the ant all the way. And when the ant mixes up with the rest of them, can I still spot the same ant? So something like that. And then you look at walls. Those are around you. You look at the woodwork which is around you, and the age does something to the walls. To the wood, and you begin to, I think it's with all of us, we begin to see images in the walls, the patterns which come with aging. Then there are, I don't know if I spoke much about it. They, somehow, maybe because I wasn't somebody who had great health as a child, so I was kept away from any unpleasantness, and even if, although it was a small family, but if, say, my uncle or my mother, if they would be having some heated discussion, which we can call kind of a quarrel, if I came close up, they would stop immediately, so I wouldn't even know as to what they would be talking about. So I had to acquire another kind of sensitivity to read the minds. I wouldn't ask them, but to imagine what they may be talking about. So I think that it's just the sensitizing of the senses which has got, which has got embedded. And then, of course, the social conditions are different. The world is different from outside that house. And now, as an adult, like I spoke of the farmer, and the condition of the farmers is the same. They find the title of the work is bound. So they're bound in many ways. Bound like a slave is bound, but also bound to the earth, to the land. And then what I sensed then, the troubles of the peasants or the farmers. That was only a vague sense then, but now it's got accentuated, and I can read more into the history of how the farmers are suffering in India today.
No, it's an important point, and I guess that line between the personal and then the political is something I think artists today negotiate
Yes.
Consistently, and I think that probably leads into a question for Nikhil. Thanks for an amazing performance in a very short period of time. Nikhil's performances are usually days, hours, weeks long even. So that was really quite special to be able to observe him working with such concentration. Perhaps you could speak a little about what that view was that you were building.
Yes, I'm going to take it from where you were talking about seeing images in walls. Even a blank wall, in a sense, offers the illusion of something that lies either beyond it or as an image of something that lies in it. So I'm interested in
I'm so sorry. I think it's also maybe the desire to break the wall.
It's the desire to break the wall.
Beyond the wall. So
yes,
so
yes.
The wall at that point is transparent, or it is permeable.
Exactly.
To the body. Yeah.
Exactly. And this idea of looking for infinity on a flat surface is something I've been preoccupied right from the beginnings of my encounters with art and art making. But I suppose as an artist whose body is always at the center of their practice, I'm always thinking about where I am and what is my vantage point and what is my perspective and how am I looking at the world around me. So, what you see on that wall is an image of what starts to look a little bit like a turbulent sea, a sea made of flesh, and a sea made out of lipstick. But I've spent all my life in port towns and port cities, and the sea has always haunted me. Even though my family is from the mountains, I've always found the sea really ominous and uncharterable, uncountable. The mountains have always seemed scalable, and I've always been able to follow the contours of a mountain. But I become liquid when I look at water. And I live in Goa right now, where I feel like I'm really immersed in this water. I bathe in it, I drink it, I become it. And so I really submerge myself in the sea, and I really appreciate my relationship to the sea. So the image of the sea and land and sky as sort of three very basic elements that make up a landscape painting, but quite specifically the sea really is playing a really important part in my life right now.
In terms of connectivity, in terms of where it leads to?
In terms of where I'm, in terms of where I am really interested in, let's say, for example, right now I'm living on the edge of the Arabian Sea, and I'm really interested in, let's say, all the histories that come out of that Arabian Sea and Goa and all the layers of colonialism and history and trade and commerce and cultural exchange that happens with the sea. But also, if I was just to connect my little life with the sea, then I'm thinking about how I draw a line, let's say, between the Emirates and Goa, for example, is because I spent my childhood in Dubai, I spent my high school years here, and when I look out from Goa, I feel like I can almost look at the Persian Gulf. I can almost touch it. Or when I remember growing up in Dubai, feeling, I think all childhood, all teenage years are very full of conflict. And I remember even then looking out at the sea and sort of feeling like I can almost look at Bombay. So there is a sense of longing that I feel with the ocean. I feel also my inability to reach, so I feel kind of helpless and insignificant in its scale and magnitude.
There's also possibility.
There's also possibility, because in a sense, I feel like by having lived in just these two places, for example, Dubai and Goa, I feel like in this life, I have navigated that sky through, in an airplane and flown over that water. That's how I got here. So,
I think that leads very nicely to Herman's project, moving from walls to doors, and from spaces that are easily traversed to spaces that we're not supposed to see. And I guess you mentioned that you have photographed about 300?
Yes, about 300.
In total. Is this a sort of project that is, I know you spoke a little about where you see it going, but in terms of what it means to go to those places and put yourself in that situation and take those photographs. Of course, these are there's heavy surveillance in those places. You're putting yourself in a position of relative precarity. Why are you photographing this? You could be stopped at any time. Could you speak a little about the process and how you sort of research and find and access these spaces?
I think that's the starting point for me that is important, as both as an artist and also as someone living in Singapore, is that I would never ask for permission to do something. And I think that's very, very crucial to the project, that it's not about writing letters, not about knowing people, not about shaking hands, and it remains technically a transgressive move. And I think within this moment of impinging on that border and also, in a way, taking something from it. You're photographing, you're taking something from it. That is, for me, a way to imagine politics. And because, let's face it, I can never be a bureaucrat. I'm terrible at negotiating any deal, But at the same time, I think it's important as a human being, also as an artist, to be politically engaged. And this is just the only way I know how to, which is to be transgressive. But at the same time, I don't want to be, how should I put it, dramatic. I think, and I think photography is such a beautiful way to take something from it, from that situation, without having to confront this sort of a threshold of a kind of a dialogue. You see what I mean? So everything remains veiled. Everything remains, a kind of mystery, which I think when you sort of see the images that is produced out of this process, you immediately want to look around the doors. Does that make sense? Instead of looking at the door. And I think that's important for me as an artist, to produce multiple ways of looking at something.
I'd like to bring Uns into the conversation.
Thanks. I think another aspect that was quite interesting was also seeing you sort of present your work and practice in the order that we saw. Kind of leads way into this interaction between looking at the ambiguity of fiction and reality and the interrelationship within that. I'm wondering if you can each touch upon that as well, but really in bringing it back to the epistemology of collection and how that is sometimes a systemized process. I'm wondering how it can sort of differentiate your practices in the sense of where, Nikhil, you were kind of, and Rambir, sort of dealing with narratives and more ephemeral kind of non-events. While Heman, on the other hand, there is this also interest in sort of collecting in terms of physicality as well, and in terms of production, in terms of perhaps also dealing with collection of unwanted knowledge or like the invisible. So I'm wondering, maybe Heman, you can sort of take us through that further as well, part of your practice.
I think it's important for me to also understand that a narrative is a collection of ideas and the kind of negotiations that occur between people about these ideas. So it's not very similar from nation building or legality, for example, that at some point, everyone has to agree on a certain level of realism, let's say. So in relationship to the idea of collecting, I would say that it just comes from a very personal thing within me, which is, everyone knows that Singaporeans are obsessive compulsive. And yes, we're like robots. So I think it's and having brought that in, I think it's interesting that it's a result of nationalism, that it's a result of the fact that we want to be the greenest country in the world, that we want to be the most sort of like high-tech. But at the same time, you realize that how does one then produce home? Like how does one produce, like literally, a place to live, right? Outside of those ideals, So I think for me, it has a lot to do with that, a lot to do with writing.
Nikhil?
I've been thinking a lot about how I am my own mini museum, and that my life, my body is a container of all my experiences and interactions and relationships and even objects, cups and saucers and spoons that have been part of my life since I was born, that I have carried with me and don't really have a sentimental relationship with them because I've lost a lot of things, I've broken them, and then I'm very happy to let them go. So, and then allow for the memory of those things to stay within me. And so I really believe in collecting in that way as I go through this life. And in relation to your question around this place that we exist in, which is between fiction and reality, I think we all occupy that space in between, where we present our many selves to the world, and which one of those selves is part of our reality and which one is fictionalized. I'm interested in this idea of fictionalizing the self because it allows me to make a story which then allows me objectivity to critically examine the self. And I feel like fictionalizing or creating fictitious personas is a way for me to shed the self and relook at myself from another vantage point. So I'm very interested in twisting these ideas of who I am and where I can go with this story.
Rambir, I guess to sort of build further on that, you were talking in your sort of lecture presentation about this idea of sort of occupying a third space and this idea of time and memory in relation to that. And I'm just thinking as well as sort of not only as an observer of these situations, but also a maker of these happenings. What is that idea of control, and where do you draw the line between fiction and reality?
Yes, you know, all, if you we're calling them collections, so they keep transforming. As I said about the horse is not a horse. The hammer is not a hammer, and neither is the cockerel a cockerel. It is something else. We can have many readings into it. They could be psychological. They could be very much political as well. This is, you know, what is it that we hold as a citizen, and what is disappearing from our hand. So there are various ways of reading. So, and when I'm working on these, so it is, there's a kind of tension which is built in the body. And all I see those tensions as political. It's the lives we are living in today, especially in India. We are going through some very difficult times with the with our institutions under threat and so on. So as an artist, it is not an activism, as I think you said as well, but for me, it is trying. I'm in some ways able to slightly hold it. So I reach at a point where the tension is slightly released in my own body when working on these, or reaching at a certain point, but it is necessary for me that I do not simplify it, where I say I understand. No, it remains beyond my complete understanding. And sometimes some work, when it reaches a kind of, for me, I understand it all, that's false. I do not work on that work anymore. I discard it. I go towards that which is there, but is slightly out of grasp still.
I really appreciated that particular question because I think in connection to just the art world, there's always this confusion about, sometimes there's this dictatorial statements about what we should be doing and who should be doing what, whose role is what. And this has always interested in me as a curator, and thinking about going beyond the object, how the ecology of the art world works itself, and how important it is to really question these very, semantics that we are always operating from, which is why every year field meeting it's important to have one particular word. It's such a simple word, right? But it's so loaded, and there's this very heavy, dedicated predication to what one word means, and yet in the world, it actually exists in so many forms, and it belongs to so many people and so many fields. And the art world has a tendency to sort of like covet it in its own way sometimes, to categorize things in places and spaces. And so this act of questioning oneself, reflecting, and always remaining open to not having the answer is very interesting. And as a curator, for years I felt like I had to speak in a particular way. I had to write my statements in a particular way. It had to have a particular language, and it had to be smart, and it had to be really sassy and full of lots of concepts and quotes, and that's all great, because those are also part of my collection of information. It's not wisdom, though, and that's the difference between information that occupies our mind and what we are able to churn as insight that has much more connection to the internal world. And so with what I try to do, it's interesting that both of you were asking mostly the artists the question and not the two of us, the curators or the administrators in here too. Just a little note. Because I also presented something quite not, ordinary, and I had to go deep inside of myself for that, and allow that experimentation of trying to convey a lot of things that I've been thinking about in this incredibly simple, playful, labyrinth manner that it actually lives in my body, in my mind, and to allow myself not to get boggled by like, well, that you shouldn't be doing. Artists do that. Like, I really heard that in my voice, in my head, and I had to allow that part to just sit and do this. And when I got the invitation from Rashid to do this, and I've been doing this field meeting for so many years, inviting everyone else to be, please do something different, don't just blah, blah, blah. I was like, I have to do this. And it's the craziest thing. I literally banged that piece of text in a few hours. Like not even thinking back, not editing, nothing. And yet, when I write a curatorial statement, it takes me days and days and days and weeks of trepidation and consideration and editing and thinking, and it has gotten more and more simplified and less heavy and more direct because of just that one exercise of allowing myself to venture into the world of fiction for myself as a curator. And so that's part of the thinking about collections is about taking this word that generally is given to the one who happens to purchase the final work and bring it right back to the very beginning where the journey actually started, and how did it travel from one point to another, and how did it manifest and take shape, and how many other people were involved in the process of that one object that finally ended up in either an institutional collection or a private collection. And that it's not okay for us to give all the credit to this term, the collector, to the one that manages to pay for an artwork.
If I just may add to Liza's point, because I think as an institution, this is something that we constantly also have to negotiate, I think, in terms of where we are positioned or who we should be, especially if you're trying to develop your own paradigm in the context of here, in the context of this region. And I think there was always pressure and expectation that we must formalize. How can you informally support the arts or the artistic community and be taken seriously by the Western institutions? And this was something that we never allowed that logic to a certain extent to even enter our organization. And I think we had to fight that informality that we embody in the context of formality that exists around us or beyond Alserkal. And negotiate those borders of disciplines that we are part of. And Alserkal Avenue was able to develop this very new paradigm where we are part of creating various programs. We liaise with artistic community we had to a certain extent, we commodify the space while we also create new opportunities for artistic interventions and artistic practice. And so there's a constant balancing act between the two, and always trying to identify where are you as an institution. And I think you self-evaluate yourself on constant basis. And I think applying that, slowing down and reflecting on yourself to an institution was something that we try to do in the way that artists or practitioners do to their work and their practice.
I really appreciate that you raised that point specifically, and it kind of makes me think of what you sort of look into in your practice, Heman, when you say that there's a certain understanding of the world wanting us to behave a certain way at times, and that at times it's also interesting to kind of resist that. Ranbir also sort of adds on to those mental complexities as well when you were talking earlier, which also kind of goes back to that inner transformation that you were talking about, or sort of tackling that monster. And I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that, Nikhil, in terms of the different roles that you also assume in your work, and in terms of sort of reconciling these different elements in terms of predominantly looking at the idea of a person's role as well.
I had a psychotherapist in the audience once who wanted to stick around after the performance to figure out whether I was actually suffering from multiple personality disorder. And well, in my conversation with them, I was able to convince them that it wasn't really a psychological problem, but it was material. It was my interest in portraiture and self-fashioning within the work. I mean, at home, I'm in my shorts and my t-shirt. And in my daily life, I'm quite casual in the way in which I present myself. I live in a very casual place as well, where, you know, the uniform is flip-flops. You know, there is, in a sense, I feel like leaving the city, you know, I feel like I have also with that left all those formalities, like, you know, Leeza, you were talking about how we're expected to be that person, that. And I think that's a very urban problem, I feel, as well, you know, where besides it being sort of an academic problem, I think it's also very much about playing that part as an urban citizen. I feel like a lot of the work that I do is, in a sense, to shed that, you know, to, even with gender, in a sense, it's not about, for me, about exploring otherness, but it's also, for me, it's about engendering, you know, it's about being comfortable in chipping away at my own masculinity, you know. Also, in a sense, I'm really interested in masks. I'm really interested in wearing them, but I'm also really interested in removing them. And what I'm always discovering, which is kind of unfortunate, is that when you remove a mask, there is another one. And then you remove that, and then there's another one, and then you remove that, and then there's another one. So, in a sense, I feel like we're in this. Maybe I should have said that to the psychotherapist. But I feel that the performance work allows me to really break down some of these, not just stereotypes, but expectations that the world puts on us. I mean, I was in a conversation with, I want to say, my partner, because in a sense we're talking about, even just in my personal life, we're talking about how we don't want to be, I don't always want to be referred to as the father of my children, you know. I don't want to refer to her as the mother of the children. You know, I feel like we are father and mother. I feel like we should say the parent of the children. You know, I feel like we need to go beyond just these conventions that have been put on us. And so the performance work really allows me that space outside of the realm of reality to take risks that I wouldn't have ordinarily been able to take. And because the world of art is quite, in a sense, generous that way. It really allows you to extend your creative self, and I use the body to do that.
Yes, we should open it up to the floor, but just before that, I wanted to say, Leeza, thank you for bringing us back into why we are here and why you do what you do. And I did want to circle back at the end to ask you a quick question about the piece that you read out, which was, for me, interesting because it was trans-historical. It was not so rooted in the contemporary. It was, like some of these practices, really playing with the idea of time, both deep into the future, but also in invoking these kind of archetypical characters. And within the text, there was also a kind of critique of the way in which we operate at the moment. And I guess maybe you don't need to answer this now. Maybe it's about what happens over the course of the next 2 days. But just to think about, you left us tantalized. You didn't tell us the ending.
Well, we can read it now.
Yeah. But I guess I would like to ask about perhaps many possible different endings and what that idea of open-endedness, whether it's for Alserkal, whether it's for me who's relocated from an institution and is trying to kind of deinstitutionalize and do something new in this region. I think it's just something we should maybe keep with us over the next couple of days. So open it up to the floor, perhaps. I think I can see most of you, so if you want to raise your hands.
Hello.
Can someone pass a mic to
Maybe
her?
a microphone would be better because, yeah, the sound is very scattered when it comes. Sorry.
Hi. Can
Hi.
you hear me now? Yes. Himan, I had a question for you. It was interesting when you were showing your works and you got to that frame about the Windows 95 kind of desktop retro image, and you talked about the invisible and the sinister. And you talked about that you might be or you are writing fiction, and I think that was very interesting for me because traditionally, even though visual arts, the definition is kind of expanding constantly and everything is taken into its fold, writing kind of keeps falling out of it and it's segregated. And I was wondering what you're doing and how that would become a part of your practice.
It's already a part of my practice. So for a very, very long time, I've been writing short stories. I have been writing scripts. I'm working on a book. And I feel that I don't want to use it to try and enter another world. Like I don't want to go into publishing. Also because it's tedious. And a lot of what I want to write does not necessarily have a plot. You see what I mean? So it's not a 3-act play or whatever, I think that like being a writer in the art world is convenient because again, it's very weirdly generous with certain things. And it also takes on a kind of ecology that is much more interesting, I feel, that it lends towards writing itself. For example, I do see something like photography as writing, and that it is a photograph is as much a text for me as much as a text is, for example, a sculpture, for example. And I think there are all these sort of like porous relationships between things that we have produced shackles on over the years because it's easier to put things into boxes rather than having a room full of stuff, So Marie Kondo is wrong. Yes, I know. I had to do the East Asian thing, you know.
It becomes another box.
Yes,
right?
yes. It becomes another box. It's much more. It has a deeper level of complexities that we have to like, you know, like grapple with, and it's dirty. I think that's interesting for me. That it's always messy and dirty, and you have to like dig into it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I love reading novels. I really do, but there is a very strict code. It's like curatorial text.
Yeah.
You know, like a novel is like you begin, the character has to go through a journey in order to become something else. And if you don't get that, you're like, this is terrible, you know? It's just literally what it is, you know? For example, the reason why someone like Haruki Murakami has been writing the same novel for the last 25 years. It's a machine. There's an industry behind it, and people want this, you know? So I think existing as a writer within the art world, for me, it's just very, very slippery, let's say. Like people, when they read my text, they don't have this expectation.
Front row, could you pass the mic?
Hello. I have a few comments and just sharing my experience watching Nikhil's performance. It was quite an experience. It started out feeling very uncomfortable, feeling like, okay, where is this going? How long is this going to take? Do I have the patience? I should really pay attention. I want to get this. I should be really present. So these are the kind of challenges that I
It's funny because I'm asking the
through.
exact same questions while I'm in the performance.
Oh, perfect. So that was actually my question to you, because at a certain point I did get to flow, and I started to feel like I can breathe and I can be a part of it, and I could give it a full.
Closer, Mike.
Yeah, I could give myself over a little bit easier, but also I felt like I could just take it easy and not try so hard. But my question was, how is it for you when you are doing these performances, navigating these uncomfortable spaces of both the audience that are watching you, but maybe also what's happening internally with you?
It's the irony is that that we mirror each other. You're not just mirroring your sister, but we're also mirroring each other, because in a sense, almost exactly what you were feeling. Like, it's okay to breathe. There's a moment when you settle into the performance. There's that horrendous discomfort. I couldn't even come and sit and watch the presentations that happened in the first part of the morning, because I had butterflies in my stomach. I started eating breakfast and I had to leave it halfway because I was like chewing, and I was feeling like, what is this I'm chewing? What is this chewing? Like, why? So all of those discomforts are actually, over the years, I've grown used to them. Those butterflies are actually like my friends. I'm like, oh, okay, these guys are back. Oh, okay. It's that discomfort feeling that I'm having before I'm going to get up there. But it's besides us mirroring each other as performer and audience. Of course, there's the implication of you in the performance as well, because you are part of the piece, right? Because you're watching, and that's what's completing the cycle, right, of looking at and being looked at. But also it is, in a sense, mirroring real life. I think there is a certain amount of discomfort in in the presentation of ourselves to the world when we get out there. You know, okay, we get used to it, and we say, okay, this is that breakfast cereal time. I'm, getting ready for work, and okay, the phone's ringing. Okay, my sister's calling. Oh, my brother's calling. Oh, I can't answer the phone right. So all of these discomforts, I think, are also mirroring life, and then you settle into the day, and then you pick pace, and you get things done, and you feel good about it, or you feel like you wish you could have done that better. Or so, in a way, I don't want to put what I do in this really mysterious space. It's not mysterious. It's artistic practice. I mean, it's the discomfort any artist feels when they enter the studio and encounter the white canvas or blank surface, it's placing that mark or making that mark takes a lot of for everyone takes courage, and it's about taking risks and then dealing with the risk, and I suppose it's the art of the studio mirrors the art of life.
I'm just going to ask.
Beautiful.
So, sorry, did you have a comment?
Thank you.
Since this man has not eaten, I wondered if we have a little more time or if we need to break for lunch.
Actually, we are done. We were about to have the music come, so let's do it without it. All right, everyone. We have to be, just before the clapping, please, we do need to come here on time for the next session. We have 4 or 5 back-to-back pieces. Extraordinary, as outstanding as what you've experienced, minus mine. Mine was just okay. I couldn't give it that completely to myself because I wasn't comfortable with saying mine was outstanding too, but I do know that it was pretty good. Anyway, please come back on time, okay? What's the time that we have to? What time do we return?